Welcome back to Between the Forks, the podcast where we dive into the people, stories, and innovations shaping the future of Clark and our partners. In today's episode, we're talking about something foundational to every successful dealership: technical training. Clark is taking bold steps forward with a brand new training initiative called CLARK TEC, designed to raise the bar on not just technician development, but dealership support and service excellence. To help us explore what CLARK TEC is all about, well, we're joined by a superstar, Oscar Silos. He's a technical trainer here at Clark. Oscar has been on the front lines of this new program, and he brings an inside perspective on how it's built, who it's for, and why now is the right time to level up your training game. Whether you're a technician, a service manager, or just someone who believes in doing the job right the first time, this one's for you. So let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast, Oscar. How are you?
I'm doing great, Sean. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's going to be an amazing episode. Sometimes it's the Oscars that don't get to be on the podcast enough to drop all the great stuff around service and training. And I think CLARK TEC needs a lot of attention. So I want to start right there at the top and just ask you, for the audience that doesn't know, what is CLARK TEC?
So CLARK TEC is our new training program, and we're really honing in on what our dealerships and technicians out there are needing. So we're really taking a deep dive into everything that comes through warranty, comes through technical assistance on the phone calls, and we're really mapping it out so that we can give the customer a better experience at the end of the day. So the main focus is, get with the times of what's current, update information, make sure everything is meeting the requirements that the customer needs, because at the end of the day, the customer needs their forklifts up and running. We need technicians that know the material, that know the truck inside out. So we're building a program that tackles everything from different angles, and we just break down the forklift into different components. And we create a class for that. So it's a tiered system. So it's going to be, it should help, technicians kind of pay attention to one thing before they move on to the next thing. And then at the end, we wrap it all together and make sure they can fix the forklift, from counterweight to fork.
I love that. I'm sure that there are a lot of people in the audience, especially from the dealership technician side, that are wondering, like, how will this program better serve those dealership techs and their service departments?
So it's going to help the dealers and their technicians, because the technicians are asking for this. A lot of technicians, we hear them on the phone, hey, when are y'all going to have a class for this? We'd really like to hear that. And we have service teleconferences with our dealers, every month, and we try to get their input as much as we can. And of course, when we're on the phone with them, so it's really going to help them. It's going to help the dealership succeed, because the technicians are going to be able to show up and know how to repair a Clark forklift. There's a bunch of forklifts out there, and they're all different. Everybody has their different flavor. And we here at Clark, we're making sure that our technicians can repair our trucks. That's why the name of the program is CLARK TEC. We want to build Clark technicians. We want everybody to be, up to speed with the current forklifts that we have out there and the current technology, because we're really stepping it up with the stuff we're putting out there. And it's time to arm the technicians with what they need, with the tools and knowledge that they need to repair those trucks.
Yeah, I'm sure that's really important. You make a really good point. There are other brands out there, and there are dealers that you want to make sure that they're actually at the very top of the game around, the Clark brand. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I also think that, and it's not surprising to hear that the dealers give feedback and they've been wanting this. I think that's a nice differentiator for the Clark brand, along with many other things. Brandon hit home runs on episode 1 of the podcast of so many different value points. This sounds like another one, but it's in one of those areas of the business that sometimes is a bit underserved. So really big fan of what Clark's doing here with this program. Let me ask you this. Why is training, especially now, why is it just more important than ever before?
So we've seen, a trend, and COVID didn't help much. There was a lot of older technicians that retired. There's technicians that, wanted to save their body. I'm one of them. I wanted to move out of turning wrenches, because I wanted to be able to still walk up some stairs without hearing too many creaks on my knees and ankles. So, a lot of technicians started making a pivot, in their career. They wanted to move up, they wanted to move out, whatever it may be, early retirement, spend time with their families. And then we have this young wave of technicians coming up. And, it's shocking how much training they're actually asking for. In my previous life at a dealership level, that was in a lot of interviews, what does y'all's technical training, schedule look like? Do y'all offer that? Is there any hands-on, this and that? So it's something that, it's these new wave of technicians coming up. They're really thriving for it. And, it's really important just to one, arm them with it, because a lot of the technicians, we also see a trend on people going to straight into the workforce, or not necessarily going to a traditional university. So if they're not going to get further education from a traditional college, and if they're not choosing to go to a trade school, then it's hands-on the job training. And it's, yes, it's the dealer's requirement to provide that for the technicians, but it's also, us at a manufacturer level, it's our duty to support our partners, our dealerships out there, to arm their technicians with the knowledge they need. Because again, these forklifts, I mean, this stuff that's coming out is, it's not like it used to be. It used to be, points, condensers, and now you're moving into lithium ion batteries that have their own, wake up signals and their own BMS. They have all these different computers. So it's really important just to make sure that they're aware of what's out there. And two, another part is safety, being properly trained. That's the biggest point.
Yeah, I don't want you to bury those leads too deep right there. You just dropped a couple of things that I think are critically important. I think it says a lot about Clark, and one of those things is, yeah, there are a lot of people that are choosing non-traditional paths in terms of their careers. The trades have become, thankfully, to there's a few people out there. One of them, I think we can think of that guy in particular, Mike Rowe, is has been such a huge proponent of looking for and promoting jobs in the trades. But the fact that Clark is building programs like Clark Tech, that is equipping the dealers, but also directly from you at the manufacturer level, of training for people that maybe not only did they skip university, maybe it's not affordable, it's also maybe just not the right career path, but some of the trade schools, sometimes dealers need to get people they don't have either of those. And so the fact that Clark is putting something in play that will accommodate even those circumstances I think that's huge. I don't think there's a single dealer. I bet you other brand dealers or other brands would be wishing they had something like that. I think that's extremely valuable, and it's another point of differentiation that I think you just add to the history and the legacy brand that Clark is. Value, 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 value. There's just so many points of it that I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
Exactly. And Clark is the first name in forklifts. We're the originators. We want to do the same thing with training. Training is not something that's unheard of. Everybody else is doing it, but we want to be, ahead of the curve. And, we want to continue, passing along the torch of, my predecessors, the training department that we've had. Clark was always known for innovation and training. So I'm just trying to take it, shift gears and hit the next level, and just build on the strong foundation that we have here. So this is going to be really good for us and the dealerships, and ultimately for the customers. The customers want their trucks fixed. I mean, that's what we're all here for. That's where our paycheck comes from. Customer has stuff they need to be moved, and it won't move without a forklift.
Well, it says a lot about you as well, and I'm guessing that there's probably others like you, but I think it's testament to you as an example of somebody who's been turning the wrenches for years and years and years, and then realizes some people are not ready to retire yet, but they're maybe aging out of a position that's a little bit more calibrated for, the younger part of your career. There's nothing wrong with that. That happens in a lot of different verticals. And here you are as a leader, an ambassador, if you will, for the importance of training so that these younger technicians come in and they have a program, things that you probably wish you had when you were at that stage, and now they're here, but you're here as a person who can be a leader in bringing that all to life internally for Clark, and then that cascading effect into the dealers. There are people that will receive training like this that will be a part of a foundational piece of their career for many, many, many years. And here you are getting to be a part of the leading effort and an ambassador of it. That must feel pretty awesome.
It does. And, I even to this day, I still remember some of the stuff. I personally went to a trade school and, I had, my fair share of formal technical training. So a lot of that stuff stuck with me and still does to this day. And you can see it in some of the curriculum that I've been building. And even my hands-on, I mean, it's 50-50. One hand I use, my formal training, and the other is the hands-on. I had some really good mentors growing up, and be honest, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them. And teaching styles may have changed over the years. They had a little bit more tough love back then, and I got some really tough skin for it. But it's time to again shift gears, and it's as an instructor, as a trainer, it's our responsibility to adapt to the learning style of the student. So for me to just sit there and just talk to them, sometimes it's great, it's well received, but other times, it's just in one ear out the other. Especially, the younger crowd, they learn a different way. So it's been a pretty good challenge, but it's been fun, to get to see them. It's pretty neat seeing everybody's hamster wheels turning in the class, and being well received as well. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's good. When the feedback is strong, that's always an indicator that you're on the right track for sure. Well, you made me think of this next question. I think is perfect. Do you think that basic technical boot camp at this point is a waste of an experienced technician's time?
I love that question because us as technicians, we're proud folk. We like to tip our hat on doing things that others can't, and hearing words like basic, it can be a trigger word. Like I'm a little beyond that, but it's really not. And so we have a basic technical boot camp that used to be called Basic Technician Boot Camp, and that was one of the first things that I suggested when I arrived, was we should change the name because it is a little misleading. It's not geared towards basic technicians, it's geared towards basic technical knowledge. So here at Clark, we have specifics that we want our technicians to know. Yes, there's, specifics of the industry, but there's things that we do that we want our technicians to do different, and that's how they're going to stand out above the rest of the crowd. So we want to break everything down all the way to the basics and make sure that they understand. And, some dealerships have, 5, 10 different lines. They have aerial, they have all different kinds of equipment that they're servicing. So the lingo gets a little confusing, right? They call one thing this over here, they call another thing, vaporizer regulator, converter. It's the same part, but it's 3 different names. Which one is it? And some technicians, when you're on the phone with them, you get not combative, but they're like, well, I know what I'm talking about. We're both right. We're just using different words. So for us here, it's not a waste of time because we want you to learn what we want you to have as a foundation. And we actually, my first boot camp here, we had a seasoned, mechanic over there. He still called himself a mechanic, but we're all technicians nowadays. But he came in, he said, I had an open mind and I wanted to see what it was all about. And he just sat there in the middle of the class. We were barely halfway through, and he says, I forgot that I forgot this stuff, and it's good as a refresher, taking it down to the basics. If you're not willing to just take a step back and learn, you're kind of making yourself not necessarily not valuable, but you're making yourself a little bit just apprehensive to learning new things, and that's the last thing we want to do in this industry, and any industry really. But forklifts have evolved so much in the last 10 years. that the basics aren't necessarily the basics anymore. So it's time to get back to that, refresh on it, and then just build from there.
That makes sense. I know sometimes the people that are going to be receiving training or training is being created for them, they sometimes get uh, overly concerned that, well, this thing is going to be built in, concrete and steel, and nothing could change about it. And so I'll ask the question that I think probably the people that would be receiving this training, or it would be made for them, will the program change if there's a need for it to?
Absolutely. So, we at the end of every course we send evaluations to every technician, and we it's anonymous if they want it to be, and we ask them, input on what do they think is outdated, what would they like to see. We even ask, what other courses would y'all like to see implemented in this program? Because right now the need is the foundation of that we built on this program. That might change, once everybody gets trained up to those particular components and those courses that we have built. The next phase might be something different, and it might turn into wire guidance, or it might turn into something deeper in the hydraulic system, and might turn into lithium. So we might take out, the powertrains course and tweak it to incorporate something else. And, of course, we have different paths down this program as well to fit the dealership's market. So some dealers, if you're down in, we're in Texas right here, so DFW has a lot of warehouses, and then we have Houston, they're the ports, and then you have the oil field down in West Texas. Those are three different forklift applications. So we want to evolve and make sure that everybody's getting what they need to succeed, and again get their customers up and going, and it's up to us to adapt to their needs. So, of course, will change it, we'll tweak it, we'll rearrange it. We probably won't start over, but we'll fix it. We'll make it tailor made.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would. I mean, it's usually the beginning of something. It's actually breaking ground first is what's probably the most difficult, time consuming, resource intensive. But the fact that you're building it in with the flexibility, and I love that you what you were describing is really a feedback loop of like asking technicians to go through the program. What do you like? What do you not like? There's always going to be people that might make suggestions that you might say, okay, thanks, but like maybe no. But the fact that there's an open feedback loop, that isn't the case a lot of times when people are building training documentation and training programs. It's like, we're going to build something, and this is going to be the heavy hand that then dictates what everyone has to do. And people sometimes get real concerned about what kind of rule following and all of that. This seems to be very much organically built into kind of the lifeblood of helping Clark dealers, improving technicians. Like, it's a level up in all cases. And then also the feedback loop of how do we keep making it better? And if that means that something should be changed, then you make a change. I don't see how everyone wouldn't really kind of warm up to that concept. It seems like a really smart way to put new training out there. And you're right, the whole world has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, but certainly in the world of forklifts, power sources alone, like that's a huge brand new, depending on how you see it, that's a new complexity, that's a new layer of interest and dynamics and detail that technicians have to have really great training for. So how do you think this new program is going to benefit Clark?
The biggest benefit we're going to see is that we're going to arm our technicians, that are dealerships, that are our partners, to be able to go out and service their partners, their customers at the end user. They're going to have that first rate of repair, the fixing it right the first time. So they're going to have, being able to go out there, diagnose it properly in a reasonable amount of time. They're going to be able to order the parts confidently, knowing that that's going to repair the job. And even then, if it's not that technician that returns back, it can be another technician that's just as knowledgeable, and he can just finish the repair, get the invoice to the customer. That's not going to break the bank. So the end result is, we've been really pushing quality on our forklifts. Well, it's time for us to step it up on the service side as well. So seeing the quality of technicians, that's going to be a big impact. And one thing that I've said since I got here was, with this Clark Tech program, this is something that I want people to put on their resume. I want technicians hanging their hat on this. I want people to hear the name Clark Tech and see it on a resume and say, we got to have this guy. The training program is over there. They know what they're talking about. They really take care of business. And, yes, that's a feather in my cap, but it's a bigger feather in the technician's cap because he's the one he's building the name. We're just supplying the information.
Yeah, once again, I think that's another huge point of differentiation. The fact that you care so much about it, that you want this to be a badge of honor for people to throw onto their resumes, to throw onto their LinkedIn profiles, all the places where now in the modern era, the digital era, that having Clark Tech certified is now something that matters, that other, people will, it's credibility. And it also is a trust building, right? The longer that program's out there, the more people that are influenced and impacted by it in positive ways, the more it becomes like a staple of what you just mentioned, which is tied to Clark's quality. And I think that's can't be overstated how effective and important that is. I want to ask you if there's, or maybe it's a what as opposed to is there, but other training that's provided in addition to the in-person training. Is there some of that in here as well?
Yes. So the technical side of the training is geared towards the truck, and then we have other facets that we're venturing into. We offer an online, we're putting out our online training. It's called Clark Learning Academy, and we're just going to have a lot of stuff that can be used as a refresher. It can be something, we're going to use it as a prerequisite on a lot of our courses, just to kind of get the simple questions out of the way, because it's a big ask, to send these technicians to, technical training. We're understanding of the cost of burden. The technicians aren't out there billing anymore, and they're out here. They're getting fed. They're paying for the hotel, the course itself. So we want to kind of minimize some of the in-class time and stuff that we can talk about before you show up. We do it on the online training. So this is something that's been very well received, and it's been one of the biggest asks from our dealers that we've had out of training, period. So it's really great. And then, amongst that too, we're willing to be flexible. There's other trainings if the dealer needs it, that might not fall in line with the training program, but we're ultimately here to serve our partners, our dealerships, to get those technicians up and going, get those trucks up and going. So whatever it takes to get those trucks running, we'll figure a way out to train them.
Well, it sounds like you are already kind of cornering the training needs from probably the two most accessible and probably expected ways, or at least from a dealer side. That being, can we log into an LMS or a learning? Sorry to use jargon for people, but a learning management system. Those have been around for a long, long time. Essentially, that's what makes it easy for the dealer or the technicians to go to that online digital environment and log in, and then they kind of participate in online learning there. That's obviously built around convenience, and you're just where you are, wherever your computer is. But having the Clark Tech program as well, it's almost like you've got all of the angles covered to make sure that you're leaving no stone unturned. Again, I think that really points to commitment to quality and the differentiation around what Clark's trying to be and what Clark really has been since the beginning, like a strong legacy brand leader. And this just speaks more to that. Let me ask you this. Why should training not be looked at as just an expense? Because a lot of dealers are, training's the last thing they want to invest in. It's the first thing they want to cut or they want to ignore.
Right.
And so for people maybe that are in that mindset, or they have an older thought process because maybe training for them hasn't evolved, or maybe they've looked at other people and thought this isn't the other brands, the way that Clark's looking at it now, why do you think that should be like training? Don't look at it as just an expense. What would you say to that dealer?
So, I've heard, oh, training's expensive. What's expensive not to train, and training is an investment. You have to invest in your technicians if you want them to invest in the company. If you want them to buy in, you have to buy in them, and one of the only ways, yes, you can increase their hourly wage, you can give them more overtime, you can give them a new van, but longevity is training, making sure that they're equipped with the knowledge, giving them something, it's the teach a man to fish, you can show them how to fix a forklift, but can you teach them how to fix a forklift? That way they can be armed to go out there. And if you take in, from my personal experience, you take care of the technician that's taking care of you, everybody's happy. You're not going to hear the belly rumbling of, oh, they don't care about me, they never send me to training. But even the what I call them heavy hitters, the heavy hitters, they can afford some training as well. Just because they're out there and they're figuring it out. Imagine how quicker they'd be if they had more training. So it's not just learning, but it's honing. It's sanding it down, putting a polish on the knowledge that these technicians have. And a lot of times you'll see people not chose forward training because they're out there just knocking it out of the park. And it shouldn't be looked like that at all. It should be an investment for sure.
Yeah, the absence of training, especially when it comes to things technical like forklifts, and there are other industries that are similar, heavy machinery, there's lots of stuff in material handling. And when you have technicians in those environments where there isn't an emphasis on training as an investment, I like that you put it that way because I think it's true. And when you don't have that, it oftentimes costs you way more than the training investment itself. People just don't want to talk about that because it's a little bit embarrassing if you forego, we don't, training's not that important, and then it proves to you that it actually is. That's one of those areas where I think a lot of dealers think in a way that is maybe a little bit more of that modern mindset is we need as much of this as we can, because otherwise what happens is technicians, I mean, for you and I, been around the planet for enough time to realize that the absence of training means that you're going to figure some way, and that some way might fix the problem, but it could be temporary. It could be a lower quality way to go. Like you're figuring something out that didn't come with, this is the fundamental. Here's the foundation of understanding this first before you just found another way to go solve that problem. And I'm sure that, when you have proper training, it makes sure that you don't actually bypass some of those things that are actually the right way to fix it. And you mentioned that just a few minutes ago. You want these people that are going to be fully trained to show up and it gets fixed the right way the first time, not somebody came up with their shortcut way of kind of getting this like a Band-Aid on it or something. Like that's not what we're looking for. And that's, I think, the heartbeat, or one of the things that cause the heartbeat of what you're doing here with Clark Tech to beat the way that it does. Like you're very focused on that.
Right. And you either pay now or you pay later. You pay to train them right now, or you're going to pay because you have to credit that invoice, down, because the technician is either getting trained on the job and the customer. I've had some very savvy customers out there be like, am I paying for that second guy? Well, no, sir. Well, am I paying you to teach him? Oh, well, you probably shouldn't either. So, it's pay now or pay later.
Yeah. Yeah. I would, this is a good question for you that kind of frames this a little bit for this part of the conversation. Do you think training is a privilege or something that is expected?
So it used to be a privilege. It used to be, oh, this guy, I like him. Let's send him, to a week-long vacation to wherever the corporate office is, and let's pay for his meals for a week and he can take a break, and then meanwhile, everybody else is pulling the wagon, pulling the extra weight that's left behind because, it's again, being gone isn't just, you being gone, it's the rest of the techs picking up your load. It's, hey, can you take care of this while I'm gone, or redistributing your calls? But, it's actually shifted to where one, it is expected from these newer people because, it's everything has something that you have to plug into it. Everything has, proprietary information. So you can't just hire somebody off the street and say, okay, go fix this truck. Well, show me how to hook up to it. Show me how to do this. So at some level, there's a lot of it that is expected. some of it is still a privilege, especially on these tiered systems that we have here. You can't just be a jerk to everybody at work and then expect to get all the way to the top of the training level. But because part of this, another aspect of this training program, we're teaching people how to be good coworkers. We're teaching technicians how to be a good team member, how to be a good leader. We're teaching them how to carry the load. So, you know, it's the answer is yes to both, but there's a certain level of it that is expected, and it shouldn't be just, plug and play anymore, because all the forklift brands out there, they're all finding a way to be different. Everybody's trying to do their own thing. So it is getting harder and harder to translate some of your knowledge from one brand to another.
Mm. Yeah, I can see that. Well, then, so why invest the money in a technician and risk them maybe taking that knowledge and going elsewhere with it?
So, we've all been there. We've had guys that just they jump for $1. This guy's going to pay me 50 cents. What can you give me? Well, you shouldn't let that, kind of put bad taste in your mouth for everybody else, because, a lot of technicians, they're looking for a chance. They're looking for an opportunity, and they're looking for somebody that believes in them. And if you do that and you put your time and effort into the right person, yes, you're gonna stumble. You're gonna put your faith in the wrong technician. Somebody's gonna pull the wool over your eyes. But in the long run, you're gonna have more that stick around because of how you treated them and how you believed in them than you do people, jumping ship. And good news spreads, bad news spreads faster, but good news spreads too, and a lot of technicians, we're at the hose shop getting a hose, eating our free popcorn, and we're talking to the other technicians, and that news spreads out. So if there's a dealer that's not investing, we all know some of those dealers that treat it that way. It gets out. So it shouldn't be something that you just you hoard, because it's harder to replace a technician than it is to train one. You know, you spent how long does it take them to set up their van? That's a new hire. You have a week long of HR training and just getting to know everybody. Then you pay them a day and a half to set their van up, and then you know then he's gone in 2 months. It's unfortunate, but it will happen. But training shouldn't be part of it. It shouldn't be something that you're worried about. Because everybody's looking for a home. Sometimes training and investment is what keeps people there.
Yeah, that was really good insights there, and I think it's fair to maybe add in these types of roles. There's a lot of data that actually supports the risk is in actually not training your people. When you have technicians today in this era that know that they need to level up, that their training level needs to be like you just talked about a few minutes ago. There is an expectation. There is some privilege too, because there's levels, like to everything, levels.
Hmm.
But these fundamental points of training for people, if the people who manage them and that they're working for don't see that as a priority and they don't train them, they're actually at bigger risk of those technicians not being secure in their role, and they might jump for 50 cents, as you say, or a buck.
Right.
They'll be chasing something that won't really make a significant difference in how much they take home at the end of the week, the month, even at the year. But they didn't feel important, recognized, appreciated. Like they just didn't feel like anybody cared enough to make sure that they are properly trained. So for anybody out there that's worried about that, because I think it's a really good question and I really love your answer, I just wanted to add to it. I would just tell dealers, everybody out there, you're at bigger risk of losing people that you don't train for today's world than not training them. Like,
Yeah.
it's a
And even
big
taking it a
mistake.
step further, if you don't train your technicians, what customers are you willing to lose? Sending an untrained technician on something, and
Right.
that's an even bigger hit.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's a really great point. Well, we are almost at a place where we would, if we were a forklift, we'd be taking this load somewhere to put it securely in the, we'd put this episode securely down somewhere where we could just say we're done with it. But before we get to that point, Oscar, I want to ask you this. If someone listening to the podcast remembers just one thing from this episode, what should it be?
It should be the commitment that we have here at Clark, to improve and to grow and build with our partners, with our dealers, with our customers. We want to establish a better improvement system and show to everybody that, Clark's here and we're ramping it up and we're taking it to the next level. Just the commitment that we're ready to make to our partners and their partners.
I love it. There is such a huge commitment there, and it's obvious in everything that Clark seems to be doing. Such a huge focus on quality, such care around the brand and the legacy of the brand, and this has been awesome to get to know more about the CLARK Tech program from you. For the audience, well, hey, that wraps up this episode of Between the Forks. Huge thanks. A massive load that, of course, any CLARK forklift could handle with ease. But a massive load of thanks to Oscar Silos for joining us and sharing not just the details of CLARK Tech, but the heart behind it, which is Clark's commitment to support and quality and growth. If there's one thing to take away today, it's that Clark isn't just building machines. They're not just building trucks. They're building up the people who keep them running. So to learn more about the Clark Learning Academy, CLARK Tech, how you can get your team plugged into that CLARK Tech program, reach out to your Clark rep, visit the internal dealer portal. If you found the episode helpful, hey, be sure to follow, rate. If you're seeing this on YouTube, like it, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode of Between the Forks with your network. And until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep raising the bar.
Thank you.
Thank you.